Welcome to another episode of the Early Years Learning Hub podcast series titled Professional Learning Tapas, where I share what I hope are some golden gems of learning that inspire you to make some changes to your practice that work for you and, most importantly, help the children you work with to thrive. It's meant to be little bite-sized pieces of professional learning, and today's topic is all about educational leadership broadly, but specifically as it relates in the early childhood setting, unpacking what's required of the role, what skills, knowledge, and attributes are required, what good leadership looks like, and how to implement the role effectively and efficiently. Let me say, though, throughout the podcast, I will be speaking of the role as it relates to the education and care sector. I think, though, these concepts apply broadly to the school sector as well. And even if you're not in a formal leadership position, even if you're a teacher in a classroom or in a service, ultimately educational leadership, I think, is about understanding age and stage appropriate pedagogy and leading people to implement high quality program and practice, which I hope that we're all educational leaders in some way or another. So hopefully everyone gets something out of this one. So let's start by unpacking the expectations of the role under the National Quality Framework. So this information is available from ASIQA, the Australian Children's Education Care Quality Authority, and they speak to the role of the educational leader is primarily to collaborate with educators and provide curriculum direction and guidance, support educators to effectively implement the cycle of planning to enhance program and practices, lead the development and implementation of an effective educational program in the service, and ensure children's learning and development are guided by the learning outcomes of the Early Years Learning Framework and or the Framework for School Age Care or other approved learning frameworks. So hopefully from those four broad points, it's clear that an educational leader, I think, as I said, in any space, is really in place in any educational setting to help people understand quality evidence-based teaching. So what's effective? How do we do it in ways that improve outcomes for children? What are the curriculum requirements in your space in terms of broader policy like the National Quality Framework, the Australian curriculum, the New South Wales syllabus, and how to implement a great program based on the planning cycle? And again, in both spaces, this is equally relevant, of observing, assessing, and analysing what children know, can do, and understand in relation to the learning outcomes of the syllabus, curriculum, or frameworks, learning frameworks. So that's kind of, I hope, summarised those points. So have a think about if you are interested in the role or being a leader in your own space, wherever you are you doing things that are contributing towards that idea of understanding a cycle of learning, effective teaching, measuring progress in relation to outcomes, those sorts of things? I also wanted to share with you some research or evidence that tells us what makes an effective educational leader. As part of my master's in educational leadership that I completed a few years back, one of the courses that I did required a systematic review. And as I'm very interested in educational leadership broadly, I focused in on what skills, knowledge, and attributes were required of the educational leader and looked at a whole lot of research that was conducted in Australia, because obviously the National Quality Framework's very specific to the Australian context. And the research had to be conducted after the inception of the role in 2012. So I'm going to give you a brief summary of what that looks like. So again, this is an understanding that our leadership needs to be informed by the evidence. This is a summary of the evidence. So the following skills is what educational leaders need: being able to map and articulate philosophy, program, and practice to measurable standards and outcomes for children, so you know that you are having an impact in your service or your school or your classroom. Managing the teams and organisational expectations of the role. So you're not a rogue player here. You need to make sure that you're doing the things that are required of you within your organisation, but also within that broader systems and policy context. Recognition that a range of leadership approaches exist at the same time, and the responsiveness to draw on the most appropriate approach at any time. So even if you're not familiar with leadership theory, it might be an area that you might want to do some research on, so you can be making sure that you're capable of drawing on a whole lot of different approaches depending on what you need to work on with your team. This is some of the knowledge that you'll be required to have or that makes an effective educational leader. Understanding of how theory connects to and influences practice. So if you understand that yourself, you are more likely to be able to lead practice and develop educators' capacity to have that understanding as well. Knowledge and application of leadership theory, including the difference between leadership and management. And the reason why that's so important is because leadership is usually things that inspire, motivate, and build towards the achievement of a vision. Managerial tasks are more likely to be, holding people account to things and not necessarily, and sometimes management skills will be appropriate, but they're not the same basically. And also the ability to adopt a relational strengths-based approach. So like your work with children, you really need to be drawing on relational pedagogy, building strong, secure reciprocal relationships, and also seeing and drawing on people's strengths. And that you understand that that there is a range of learning styles and a range of methods, both formal and informal, to facilitate learning, and viewing learning within your team as an embedded everyday practice. So those are some of the things that you might need to think about. If you don't already have knowledge in that space, that's where you might build some of those things in terms of helping yourself be prepared for the role. There's also some personal attributes that are really important if you're going to be a successful educational leader. And this was highlighted quite clearly in the services that were achieving high quality results, and that was usually deemed by assessment and rating results. So the personal attributes included having a sense of purpose and vision. Again, you can't inspire others towards that if you don't have it yourself. Adaptability and responsibility as a practitioner and being able to act autonomously and be intrinsically motivated. You need that yourself, and therefore then you can instill that and build that capacity in others. Ability to prioritize and create a separate space for pedagogy. That's really, really challenging in our world where we have a lot of crisis management happening in our services at any given time, but prioritizing that separate space so educators can focus in on improving their pedagogy, and all of those other crisis management things are likely to fall away when people are understanding and implementing high quality practice. A commitment to the role with a focus on outcomes for children, as well as valuing their own contribution to the service. So the idea that you feel fulfilled and rewarded by contributing to the service, but you're also committed to contributing outcomes for children. So what does this look like in practice? Well, I think it looks like these things. Being a good leader looks like adopting a strengths-based approach. So seeing what people and working with what people can do, finding a way to focus in on that to start with instead of people's deficits and problems. It's a negative approach and you're more likely to get more negativity. If you can work with something that someone does well, then that's likely to filter through some of their practices that you'd like to focus in on improving. Investing time in people and working alongside them, modeling and explaining the why. This is really important. And again, if you don't have much time as the educational leader, it's going to be really helpful if you have the ability to work in different rooms. Mentoring and coaching to invest in building capacity and improving practice based on self-determination. In other words, getting people to pick the things themselves that they want to work on and improve. The reason why that's so important is if you're picking something for someone, chances are you're going to have very little results. If they are intrinsically motivated because they've chosen the thing that they want to work on, that's more likely to generate some success for them and you in the role. And also being able to critically reflect on your leadership and with your team, analysing what's happening. So, getting an idea of whether or not your leadership is working for your context and for your team and for the needs of your service and community at the moment. And also analysing what's happening and why is it happening in this way. If you've got some behaviour issues, if you've got some issues with families, why is it happening in this way? And leading the team through really analysing that, unpicking what the problem is and what could be some evidence-based solutions to that. That idea of drawing in research and thinking about what we can do. Also, what's happening now and how does it align with professional standards? Area 4 talks about this. What does the National Quality Framework say or the standards say about quality practice in regard to this area? What does the Code of Ethics say about this thing? What is any other form of advice and guidance out there in terms of professional standards? What is it saying, and does your practice align with that? And is your practice inclusive of a variety of different learning styles, as I mentioned, for educators and children? Is it inclusive of different cultural backgrounds of educators and children of families? Looking at all those sorts of things. And then working on improving it. Even if you're really good at it, this is an ongoing journey of continuous improvement, what we're doing. So how are you going to do that effectively and efficiently? Because I am all about making things easier and simpler. This work that we do is challenging. We have lots of expectations and lots of requirements, but sometimes we have a lot of things that we introduce in the name of trying to meet that requirement that can tend to be instead making it more onerous. So first thing I think is equipping yourself first and foremost with the skills and knowledge that you need to do the things that we just talked about. So anytime you've got a change in roles, especially moving into leadership role, always requires new skills, a broader knowledge base and some specific attributes to help you feel more empowered. So if there's anything in that you think you could work on, then that's something that you could look at in terms of seeking support for the role. So you'd like to do some professional learning, or you'd like to gain some more experience or have a mentor or whatever it might be. The second thing I would say is getting buy-in from everyone. Share your vision or create one together. Let people know that you want to make things easier for them, that you want to bring joy into or back into their work, that you want to support them with whatever they're finding challenging and help them find a better solution for it. Work with people to identify some priority areas for them. Work on those things first. Prioritize those things. Work on small things to make changes, small changes to start with. Create some wins that you can celebrate, and then work on some other areas that you think are priority areas as well. Keep things simple, really simple. Simplify the role, simplify what you've got to do. At those points above, you notice there was no mention of any requirement to document anything in great detail. You may be asked to show some evidence of how you've supported educators to do those things, but you will not necessarily need to be asked to document any particular conversations or any particular check-in points. So don't create more work for yourself. Try and have a really simple thing. Maybe you use your programming and planning template, whatever. If you've already got an app, whatever you've already got, try and figure out a way to put some educational leader notes into that, so you're not creating a new thing that you have to manage. If you've got limited time and you're not working directly with children, try to have some simple conversations. Sorry, if you are working directly with the children, have no release time, try to have some simple conversations on the go. Be creative with moving educators around to allow you to observe practice, give positive feedback, model some examples of experiences. So if you can, swap rooms with people, do whatever you need to do. As I said, do the role according to the time and the capacity that you have, and do small things if you haven't got very much time, and find some ways to document on the go as you go. If whatever's relevant for whatever you might, if you're setting a goal with someone, that's something relevant to write so you can keep track of it, and, setting up some success measures for that goal. How we know if we've achieved it, those sorts of things are good to write because they're the things that you want to look back on. The other thing that I want to emphasize, as I've said before, but within this element, there is a requirement or an expectation that the organisation supports you in your role. So seek some support if you're able, in order to be a great leader, to get some release time, to get some time to do some professional learning yourself. And that definitely will help you feel like you can take on the role with gusto. Now, the Early Years Learning Hub, as you can probably tell, has some professional learning courses. We have a whole catalogue dedicated to the educational leader, because I believe there are not too many really practical resources out there for the educational leader. So I have developed some courses that I think are spot on for what educational leaders need. So first of all, the first course is unpacking the requirements of the role. So in like this sort of, 4 points above, in a lot more detail. What does it look like? What do you need to do? How do you build? The second course is building understanding of quality early childhood program of practice, or school age care. It's equally relevant. So what does quality look like, and how do you help people understand what quality is? What to look for in scaffolding practice, so you've got an idea of what you could do and the conversations that you could have. And we've got templates throughout for, like a recording the information if you want to use them. There's links to planning and quality areas because the educational leader does have a pivotal role in continuous improvement, particularly around setting goals or anything that relates to improving practice across all the quality areas. So that's a goodie. Motivating and mentoring team members, a really good course if that's an area that you'd like to focus in on. Managing challenges, because we've all know that that's going to happen in the leadership space, and also leading action research. So if you're really, feeling confident in the role, and you'd like to lead the team into really unpacking in great detail and really being driven by critical reflection and drawing on evidence, action research is the one for you. So the link will be to the Educational Leader Catalogue in the show notes, and you can buy those all together as a bundle, or you can buy the courses individually. I highly recommend doing those. We've also got a blog where we've stepped out this sort of information as well, a free blog if you'd like to have a look at that. So that brings us to the close of another Professional Learning Tapas episode. I hope that you found it interesting and helpful, and don't forget to follow us and rate our show, please. Thanks for listening. Bye.